It all began in a place more beautiful than any garden we could ever design. Picture it, a perfect world, lush and full of life, where everything was just as it should be. This was the Garden of Eden, a home created by God Himself. He placed the first man, Adam, and the first woman, Eve, in this paradise. It was a space of pure connection, where they walked with God in the cool of the day. He gave them everything they could ever need or want, with just one simple boundary. He told them they could eat from any tree in the garden except for one, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It wasn't about restriction, it was about trust, a single thread of obedience that held their perfect world together. Imagine a home where every corner is filled with peace and every detail speaks of love. That was their reality. They were tasked with caring for the garden, cultivating the ground, and watching it flourish under their care. This simple instruction to avoid one tree was the foundation of their relationship with God, a daily choice to trust His goodness and His plan for their lives. It was a small anchor in a vast sea of blessings, meant to keep them safe and secure in His love. But as with any story, a new chapter was about to begin. The peace of the garden was about to be disturbed by a subtle, questioning voice. Into this perfect garden slithered a subtle and cunning voice. The serpent, more crafty than any other creature, approached Eve with a simple question, one designed to plant a tiny seed of doubt. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? It was a small twist of God's words, just enough to make her pause and reconsider what she knew to be true. It's like when you're looking at a design plan, and someone points out a flaw you never saw, making you question the entire vision. The serpent wasn't just asking a question. He was suggesting that God was holding something back, that His goodness wasn't as generous as it seemed. He didn't just question God's words, He flat out denied them. "You will not certainly die," He hissed, directly contradicting the one who gave them life. He then painted a beautiful, tempting picture of what could be. He told Eve that God knew that if she ate the fruit, her eyes would be opened, and she would be like God, knowing good and evil. He made disobedience sound like an upgrade, a secret shortcut to wisdom and power. He was selling a counterfeit version of a full life, promising a grander view from a shaky foundation. This is where the temptation took root. It wasn't just about a piece of fruit. It was about trusting our own understanding over God's loving guidance. Eve looked at the tree and saw that it was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom. The serpent's lie had reframed the picture, making the forbidden thing look like the one thing she was missing. Adam was with her, and he too was drawn into this web of deception. They stood at a crossroads, with God's simple truth on one side and the serpent's glittering lie on the other. In that moment, they chose to listen to the whisper of doubt instead of the voice of their Creator. Eve took the fruit, she ate it, and she gave some to Adam, who also ate. It was a quiet act, but its impact would echo through generations. They reached for what was forbidden, believing it held the key to a better existence. The moment they ate the fruit, their eyes were opened, but not in the way the serpent had promised. It wasn't a grand revelation of divine wisdom. Instead, a flood of new, unsettling feelings rushed in. For the first time, they saw their own vulnerability, and shame washed over them like a cold tide. They realized they were naked, and they frantically tried to cover themselves, sewing fig leaves together to create makeshift coverings. The beautiful, open connection they once had was gone, replaced by an urgent need to hide. The home they once felt so secure in suddenly felt exposed, and they felt like strangers in their own skin. When they heard the sound of God walking in the garden, the sound that once brought them joy now sparked terror in their hearts. Fear, an emotion they had never known, gripped them. Instead of running to greet Him, they ran to hide from Him among the trees. Think of a child who has broken something precious and hides when they hear their parents' footsteps. That was Adam and Eve. When God called out, "Where are you?" He wasn't asking for their location. He was asking about their hearts. He was calling them back from the shadows, wanting to know what had happened to the open, trusting relationship they once shared. Adam's reply revealed the deep cracks that had formed in their foundation. "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." From there, the blame game began. Adam blamed Eve, and Eve blamed the serpent. No one was willing to take responsibility for their choice. The beautiful unity they once shared was fractured, replaced by finger-pointing and excuses. Their sin didn't just create a rift between them and God, it created a rift between each other. The consequences were profound and far-reaching. God, in his justice, pronounced a curse. The serpent was cursed. The woman would face pain in childbirth. And the man would have to toil and sweat to work the ground, which would now produce thorns and thistles. And the most heartbreaking consequence of all, they would now face physical death, their bodies eventually returning to the dust from which they were made. Finally, God sent them out of the Garden of Eden, away from his immediate presence, and away from the tree of life. The door to their perfect home was closed, and they were left to navigate a broken world. Even in this moment of devastating heartbreak, with the echoes of their failure hanging in the air, a flicker of hope appeared. Before God sent Adam and Eve out of the garden, he did something incredibly tender. He replaced their flimsy, man-made coverings of fig leaves with something far more durable. He made them garments of skin, clothing them himself. This was the first sacrifice, a quiet act of provision that showed his heart was still for them. He saw their shame and their need, and he met them right there in their brokenness. It was a demonstration of a love that covers, a grace that steps in when we can't fix things ourselves. But God's grace didn't stop with a physical covering. Woven into the curse he pronounced on the serpent was an incredible promise, a beacon of light in the darkness. Speaking to the serpent, God said, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." This verse, often called the first gospel, is a beautiful piece of foreshadowing. It's a promise that one day, a descendant of Eve, a savior, would come and deliver a final, crushing blow to the serpent, to evil itself. Though this savior would be wounded in the process, he would ultimately be victorious. This promise changed everything. It meant that this wasn't the end of the story. It meant that sin and death would not have the final word. God was already laying the foundation for a restoration project far grander than anyone could imagine. He was planting a seed of redemption in the soil of their failure. For Adam and Eve, this promise would have been their only hope as they walked out of the garden gates. It was something to cling to in a world that was now hard and unfamiliar. It was a whisper from their Creator that he had not abandoned them, that a plan was already in motion to one day bring them home. This promise is the thread that runs through the entire Bible. It's the story of a loving God who relentlessly pursues his people, making a way back to him. While Adam and Eve's choice brought separation, God's promise brought the hope of reconciliation. He knew the full extent of the damage, but he also knew the cure. This moment reveals that even when we make our biggest messes, God is already at work, designing a way to redeem, restore, and make all things new. The story of the garden isn't just about something that happened long ago. It's a story that speaks to our own lives today. We all face our own versions of the serpent's whisper, don't we? Those little doubts that creep in, making us question God's goodness or his plan for our lives. Temptation often comes to us disguised as something good, something desirable that promises to make us wiser or happier. Recognizing these whispers for what they are, counterfeit promises, is the first step in choosing a better path. It's about learning to distinguish the voice of our loving Creator from the noise of a broken world. Obedience can sometimes feel like a restriction, just as that one tree might have felt to Adam and Eve. But this story teaches us that God's boundaries are always born out of love. They are like the sturdy walls of a well-built home, designed not to confine us, but to protect us. When we choose to trust God's ways over our own, we are choosing to build our lives on a solid foundation. But what happens when we fail? What about the times when we eat the fruit, when we choose our own way and find ourselves hiding in shame? This story is for us too. Just as God sought out Adam and Eve in the garden, he seeks us out in our brokenness. He doesn't wait for us to have it all together. He meets us right where we are, offering a covering of grace that is far greater than our shame. The promise of Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, finds its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus, the one who crushed the head of the serpent and made a way for us to come back home to God. So, how do we live in light of this story? We live with hope. We build our lives not on the shifting sands of our own efforts, but on the bedrock of God's promise. When you feel the weight of your mistakes, remember the God who clothes the shamed. When you face temptation, remember the loving boundaries He gives for your protection. And when the world feels broken, remember the promise that one day, all things will be made new. What whispers are you listening to today, and how can you lean more fully into the beautiful, life-giving truth of God's unchanging love for you? Like, share, and comment.